Post Reformation period is about 200 years, ranging from 1600 to 1800 AD. We have some musical giants that enter the scene. You may have heard of Bach and Handel. So Handel's Hallelujah is super famous. If you've seen Sister Act, you've got these two amazing composers who are kind of battling it out creatively in the use of harmonies and the inclusion of singers. So it's a huge juxtaposition when we think about where we've come from, the medieval period, 1,000 years with just the clergy singing with very little congregational singing. And then we move into the Reformation period and you start seeing, what Martin Luther and John Calvin are contributing to the musical scene when it comes to the encouragement of people singing again. And now you're in the 16 to 1800s and you've got these harmonies and singers, and I just think of fireworks. That's what it's like right now. So another really key person here is Pastor Isaac Watts. He becomes this really amazing, joyful hymn writer. Again, much like Francis of Assisi that we mentioned earlier, he is writing joyful songs with the use of instruments. But however, there were churches in Scotland and England that were heavily opposed to the sound of his joyful hymns. So one that you may have heard that we still sing today is When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. So again, I think it's beautiful that you've got these men and women who have been writing and their hymns are still preserved and they have the theological content and the melodies that we still use today. Then we have the Wesley brothers, John and Charles Wesley. We have the Great Awakening sort of attributed to them, and they were hymn writers and they wrote over 6,000 hymns. Can you even imagine writing 6,000 hymns between you? And they really focused on theology within the content of their songwriting, as well as experiential things that were happening to them. So I think that is really interesting to note. If you look at the worship landscape today, how many songs we sing and are really ministered to by that actually come from the experience of the songwriter saying, this is how I feel about you, God, and this is what I've experienced when I've come into your presence. We see that type of writing really coming to play here in some of the 6,000 hymns that the Wesley brothers contributed. And so this Great Awakening, the revival in Europe, actually makes its way to the USA with George Whitefield and John Edwards. They come over to the US and really encourage congregational singing as well. Another two groups of people that I'd just like to mention are the Moravians. They started off in Germany and they came to the US, and they are the first church that actually encouraged the use of instruments in the US, which I think is so cool when it comes to what the worship landscape is starting to look like. And then we also have the disciples of John Huss, and they're referred to as the United Brethren. They start using violins, clarinets, trumpets. I mean, can you even imagine it? You haven't heard any of this before, and then in the US we've got revival coming over the ocean and the use of worship. As revival is happening, so is a real change in worship. So we still have some opposition to the organ, but eventually we'll talk about the next two periods, which is the modern and the postmodern musical period.